Hi everyone, and welcome to the videos on the first text that we're going to study in National 5 and Higher, which is Visiting Hour by Norman McCaig. This video is going to give you a wee introduction to the text. Remember that before you do this, you need to have read the text at least a couple of times and watched the videos on studying literature. So if you haven't done those things, go and do that just now and then come back to this. But I'm going to introduce you to the text and give you an idea of the sorts of things that you should be thinking about as we get started with it. So, first of all, things you need to remember. You're going to have to make your own notes on this text, so do that right from the start. I'm not giving out sets of notes, which gives you all the answers. These videos won't do that either. If you want to understand the text properly so that you can then write about it, so that you can then get good marks at the end, then you need to make sure you fully understand everything about it. And the way that you do that, the process for achieving that, is by creating your own notes. Okay, it's not, people don't understand poems and stories and that by magic, they understand them by doing the work. Obviously, there's going to be things there to help you do that. So the videos will all be available to you. The assignments that we do for the tutorials, the templates that I make available for notes, the tutorial discussions themselves. And I want to see you asking questions as we go through this process. So if there are things you're not quite sure of, if there are bits where you've got a bit confused, if there are particular ideas that you've had about interpreting a particular bit of the poem, then brilliant, have a look at that. Continuously developing your notes as well, obviously, is important as we go through the year, and part of that is annotation, which is what you can see on the screen here. So just a wee example. People might have different ways of taking their notes this year, because I know you're working online obviously, but in its kind of basic sense, annotating a poem is one of the best ways to go about understanding it. So you can't really read all the notes there, obviously, but for each little bit that might be interesting, you know, it's been circled, there's a name of a technique or an effect, and then a comment on the effect that's being used. I'll show you how to get into that in a bit more detail later on, but I would recommend that you, maybe if you can, print out a copy of your poem and do this, or do a version of this in your shared class notebook. So, things to ask about the poem then for you to get started. The first thing is the title, Visiting Hour. That should generate some first impressions. That should make you think about certain things, certain places, certain events, certainly certain emotions as well. And it might even generate personal responses from the reader. It does for me, certainly. So, when you start to look at the poem, one of the first things, look at the title and make some notes on what are those first impressions and what are your first responses. The next thing you probably want to think about here is the speaker. It's the hospital smell combs my nostrils. So it's an individual talking in the first person, telling us about their own experiences. So at different stages in the poem, what do we know about the speaker? What are they actually doing physically? What are they doing? But emotionally, psychologically, how are they feeling? How are they coping with their situation? And why are they doing what they're doing? So obviously he's visiting a hospital. Why is he doing that? Who's there to visit? What is he looking for? How does he feel? What's his reaction at different stages? So by looking through the poem with a focus on the speaker and thinking about these kinds of questions, you'll find it easier to actually get into some of the detailed analysis that we need to do as well. So go through the text, ask yourself those questions. You also want to ask about the person being visited, who is described in a bit of detail in the poem. So tell me about them. What do we know about them? Who are they? What's their situation? What's going on? And what's the relationship between the speaker and the patient? And how much of it can you discern, and how do you think you can discern that? There's actually quite a lot in the poem that's suggested about the relationship, even though it's not made explicit. So it'll be interesting to see how different people interpret that. So answering these questions here, also important. What's the situation of the patient? Who is that person? But also, what is the relationship between the speaker and the patient? And finally, once you've got through all of that, you should at this point then have a good understanding of what are the emotions being explored in the poem, because it is fundamentally a poem focused on emotion. It does other things too, but emotions is understanding how they are portrayed and explored is probably the best way into this particular text. So try and get yourself a short list. Which emotions are being explored in this text specifically? Try and be really, really clear about which ones are being explored, and then that should lead you into how, which is going to help you look a bit more at the actual language that's being used, the techniques being used, the way in which the author is sort of taking you and guiding you through the different feelings that are being developed. Okay, so that's the intro to Visiting Hour. A couple more to come, which is going to sort of guide you through stanzas 1, 2, and 3, and then stanzas 4, 5, and 6. And obviously, we'll be getting into this as we start the small group tutorials for the National 5 and the higher.